Good morning. It is Sunday, January the 30th. Thank God it's Sunday. And this is The Drill. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, welcoming all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And so today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare and the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch and Beyond Reason, the latest chapter in the book, How We Got Here. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. Ineffable Creator, who out of the treasures of thy wisdom has appointed 3 hierarchies of angels and set them in admirable order high above the heavens, and has disposed the divers portion of the universe in such marvelous array. Thou who art called the true source of light and supereminent principle of wisdom, be pleased to cast a beam of thy radiance upon the darkness of my mind and dispel me from the double darkness of sin and ignorance in which I have been born. Thou who makest eloquent the tongues of little children, fashion my words and pour upon my lips the grace of thy benediction. Grant me penetration to understand, capacity to retain, method and facility in study, subtlety in interpretation, and abundant grace of expression. Order the beginning, direct the progress, and perfect the achievement of my work. Thou who art true God and man, and livest and reignest forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. And now the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for January the 30th. I will enlarge each part of your life. I will break off of your life any limitations and restrictions placed on your life by any evil spirit. I will enlarge each part of your life and will keep you from evil. My kingdom and government will increase in your life, and you will receive deliverance and enlargement for your life. I will let you increase exceedingly. You will increase in wisdom and stature and in strength. You will confound your adversaries as my grace and favor increase in your life. My word will increase in your life, and the years of your life will be increased. You will flourish like a palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They will take root in your house and will do well. They will be trees that stay healthy and fruitful to all your generations. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 7, chapter 60, verses 4 through 5, Acts chapter 9, verse 22, Psalm 92, verse 12. Prayer declaration: cast out my enemies and enlarge my borders. Enlarge my heart so I can run the way of your commandments. Enlarge my steps so I can receive your wealth and prosperity. Let me increase in the knowledge of God, and let me increase and abound in love. And that was the daily declaration for spiritual warfare for January the 30th. thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He is open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He is a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. Thank you, thank you. And now there's no free lunch. The enrichment wasn't achieved by government coercion, which is usually counterproductive, nor was it achieved by science unassisted, or the exploitation of slaves, or the routine accumulation of capital, or a profound dialectic of history. It was achieved by liberty alone, a necessary and pretty much sufficient cause. Give people liberty, and by uncoerced cooperation through commerce, they become adults, enriched in body and soul. Deidre McCloskey. What McCloskey has said here provides us valuable reinforcement. Liberty facilitated greater human action, and out of greater human action came enrichment. A freer mankind acting with capacity, agency, and incentive raised the standard of living exponentially upon absorption of this greater freedom. But McCloskey says that liberty was pretty much sufficient, an inadequate but telling qualifier. Yes, liberty enabled free exchange, and in such cooperative effort, adulthood is needed. But it is that coupling of freedom to virtue, to responsibility, to cooperation, to integrity, to morality, to trust that became the potent formula. Liberty incentivizes it. Liberty is a necessary condition for it. But liberty alone is not sufficient. Liberty coupled with virtue becomes the ideal recipe for prosperity. And that was a section from There's No Free Lunch. Thank you, thank you. Beyond Reason. One afternoon in the spring of 1977, provoked by one condescending comment too many, the wife of the Prime Minister of Canada raced up the stairs of the official residence in Ottawa and tore to bits with her bare hands a tapestry hanging above the landing. She was offended not by the tapestry's earth tones or big nubby knots, but by the words embroidered into it. Reason before passion. The favorite motto of her cold, cerebral husband, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Margaret Trudeau would commit much worse excesses before the marriage was finally dissolved, smuggling drugs in the prime ministerial luggage, engaging in liaisons with rock stars and playboys, allowing herself to be photographed squatting on a step at Studio 54, visibly without underwear. The tapestry attack may not actually qualify as one of those excesses. It could be thought of as just an especially exuberant way of expressing the mood of the time. It was a mood that celebrated the emotive and intuitive and denigrated the rational and the intellectual. Trust your feelings, Luke, was the advice that the spirit of wise old Obi-Wan Kenobi whispered in the climactic moments of 1977's Star Wars. And young Skywalker obediently shut his eyes, put his faith in the Force and not his onboard computer to aim the shot that would destroy the evil Death Star. It was in their feelings that the Americans of the 1970s put their trust. They drank white wine and luxuriated in the caressing music of Jackson Browne and James Taylor and Joan Armatrading. Show Some Emotion was the title of Armatrading's 1977 hit album. In the early 1970s, it was estimated there were some 5,000 encounter groups in New York City. The leader of one of them expressed the spirit of the age in a magazine interview. We're all so locked up in ourselves. We've gotten so many defenses going that we've forgotten how to feel. We're physically tight and so emotionally tight that we don't dare let go for fear of finding out what we really feel. The point is to get rid of those blocks, both emotional and physical, so we can start growing as human beings again. What an amazing turn of events. Only a generation before, the United States had been the homeland of efficiency and practicality, a country so congenial to dreamers, artists, and poets that they fled for Europe as soon as they could scrape together the boat fare. And yet, if we cast our mind back only a little further, the turn of events might not have seemed so amazing after all. The Opraization of public life is usually talked about as if it were a brand new thing. It is in reality the return of something antique. 100 years ago, middle-class life in Britain and America was bathed in the gush of emotions. Reread the poetry of Swinburne or the orations of Daniel Webster, glance at the paintings of Frederick Leighton or old photographs of the obsequies of General Grant, if you doubt it. The wry, laconic anti-emotionalism of Jimmy Stewart or Prince Philip is the last relic of the early 20th century reaction against the overwrought romanticism of the Victorians. Bob Dole brought to his political speeches the same sensibility that Ernest Hemingway brought to his novels. Hemingway's generation had learned in the fire and slaughter of the First World War to mistrust the man who put his hand on his heart while wiping a tear from his eye. Frederick Lewis Allen recalled the terse manners of his contemporaries. During the whole 3 years and 8 months that the United States fought the Second World War, there was no anti-war faction, no organized pacifist element, no objection to huge appropriations, no noticeable opposition to the draft. Yet there was also a minimum of crusading spirit. They, the men and women of the 40s, didn't want to be victims of hysteria. They felt uncomfortable about flag waving. They preferred to be matter-of-fact about the job at hand. These people were unostentedly loyal and went to battle, or saw their brothers and sons go, without reservation. Yet they remained emotionally on guard, disillusioned and deadpan. Back in a minute. Thank you. We think now of the dislike of emotional fuss and show as generically old-fashioned. It is probably truer to say that the laconic style we associate with the GI generation came into fashion in the 1920s and went out in the 1970s to be replaced by a style reminiscent of the moist, voluptuous sentimentality of 100 years ago, with the teary television interview replacing black crepe. This was the style of the two-party conventions in 1996. It is the style of the most talked about mass movement of the 1990s, the evangelical promise keepers, who brought stadiums full of middle-aged husbands and fathers together to weep and hug. It is the style of contemporary American evangelism. And it is the style of the most successful politicians of the age, the Bill Clintons and the Tony Blairs, as they explain how this or that policy will save the life of a child. The gurus of the 1970s taught, and we today still seem to believe, that to delve honestly into one's feelings requires one to shut down the analytical lobes of the mind. People often talk about wanting to be spontaneous, to live out of their feelings, reported the authors of How to Be Your Own Best Friend. They have locked themselves into intellectual boxes where they hardly know what they feel anymore. They become desperate to experience plain, simple emotion. They think if they could throw away their minds, they would be free. This jargon of the 70s had a surprisingly respectable history. In the aftermath of World War II, the Army sought techniques to improve the efficiency of small fighting units, the crew of a tank, an infantry squad. It commissioned studies on collective problem solving, and one set of those studies, conducted in 1946 at New Britain Teachers College by an MIT professor named Kurt Lewin, found something interesting. As a group of 5 to 7 people worked on a problem, temper sometimes flared. "Bob, why must you always jeer at everything I say?" "Because, Fred, everything you say is stupid, that's why." And soon the group was so angry that all work stopped. Underlying the anger, however, was truth. Bob really was jeering. Fred really did talk before thinking. If certain rules were set for the discussion, no criticism of personalities, only of ideas, accept all statements about feelings as true, and then try to understand where those feelings come from, and so on, Bob's and Fred's failings could be addressed without poisoning relations between them. Thus was born transactional analysis, so-called because it studied specific interactions between particular people over a short period of time. Transactional analysis quickly migrated from the military to the business world and thence into the general arsenal of psychotherapy. Along the way, it got a new name, group therapy, and a new mission. If an individual could be shown how he mishandled 6 randomly chosen strangers, he would learn from that experience how to handle better all the other people in his life. But something else happened along the way, the transactional analysis technique. Avoid judging the whole person. Stick to the problem before us here and now was transmuted into a philosophy of life in which frankness substitutes for tact, self-expression for manners, nonverbal techniques for language, and immediacy for responsibility. This philosophy condemned abstract reasoning and celebrated non-judgmental acceptance. Suddenly, the airwaves and newspapers are crammed full of psychological experts blaming rational thought for the ailments of American society. Armed with their theory, Psychology Today charged in 1972, thinking types go out to do battle with the world. They can easily become rigid, narrow-minded, and dogmatic. Such pejorative terms as martinet, opinionated, difficult, and arrogant frequently are employed to describe these individuals. Spread-collared business consultants echoed the psychologists. The majority of businessmen are incapable of original thought because they are unable to escape from the tyranny of reason. Those words from the legendary ad man David Ogilvy are approvingly quoted in the 1984 publishing phenomenon In Search of Excellence. The condemnation of rationalism was seized upon by the burgeoning environmental movement. It was out-of-control rationality that was fouling the air, ensnaring workers in bureaucracy, estranging mankind from the earth. There's just no escape from it, moaned the 1974 bestseller Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. From what? The whole thing, the whole organized bit, the system. Sensing that this wasn't a very helpful definition, the narrator commented, the it is a kind of force that gives rise to technology, something undefined but inhuman, mechanical, lifeless, a blind monster, a death force, something hideous they are running from but know they can never escape. An editorial in New West magazine, the California counterpart to Clay Felker's influential New York, complained, increasingly we've handed over our destinies, our bodies, our lives to specialized experts. The short-term effects have been dazzling in some cases. Over the longer range, however, our dependence on expertise is creating a paralyzing sense of individual helplessness. And the experts have often been wrong. They showed us how to defeat the Viet Cong with technology. They concocted deadly pesticides to increase food production. They devised indestructible plastic substances to take the place of metal and wood. But somehow, in their feverish specialization, they missed the larger picture. Back in a minute. Thank you. The man in the white coat had been the hero of the hour in the 40s and 50s. His radar saved Britain in 1940, his atomic bombs compelled Japan's surrender, and his hydrogen bombs deterred Joe Stalin from invading Western Europe. 25 years later, that same scientist stood arraigned for defoliating and napalming Vietnam, and one best showed one's opposition to that war by turning one's back on modern science and its works. In retrospect, there was something sweetly comic about the back to the land trend of the 70s. Who but Americans would display their rejection of materialism and industrialism by buying 10-speed bicycles crafted from materials developed for the space project? Yet, for all the folly and self-indulgence of the anti-rationalists, they were onto something real. For half a century, America's leaders had worked to gather their society under greater control to make it less volatile, more predictable, more legible. The economic techniques had smoothed out the violent business cycles of the 19th century. Their schools taught similar curricula in similar ways from one ocean to another. Regional accents were smoothed away by television. Local products disappeared as supermarkets replaced corner stores. Zoning ordinances ensured that similar people lived in similar houses within similar neighborhoods. Psychologists kept an eye peeled so the odd and the eccentric could be speedily treated. The welfare states, taxes, and benefits tried to ensure that nobody rose too high or sank too low. In the blue and white cards of the Social Security system, America acquired its first national identity card. In the Scholastic Aptitude Test, its first national exam. In the Selective Service System, its first peacetime conscription. Most of these innovations had been initially welcome. Americans who had endured the terrible uncertainty and risk of a wide-open society, Americans who had lived through the Depression, who had kept house in the old tenements, who knew the dread of the summer polio season, were cheerfully willing to exchange the dangers and terrors of the old world and the carefully managed security promised them by the experts. But almost as soon as the bargain was ratified, a new generation of Americans began to question it. They demanded to know, what had they given up and to whom? Back in a minute. Thank you. West of the U.S. Capitol and south of the Mall, squeezed into a few blocks alongside the Potomac River, lies the tiny southwest quadrant of Washington, D.C., the hottest, swampiest district in a hot and swampy town. In the early 1950s, southwest D.C. was a slum. It contained some of the oldest private homes in the district, brick row houses built in the days of Benjamin Harrison, and wooden frame structures that dated back to the Civil War. Southwest was home to fish markets and barbershops and clapboard churches and cheap brothels and venerable trees, not to mention some 45,000 people, most of them black and poor. Between 1954 and 1958, in the grandest urban renewal project of the Eisenhower years, the federal government razed almost 90% of those buildings, cut down all the trees, expropriated all the shops, and displaced more than half the population. In place of the grime and noise and neighborliness of the old city streets, in place of the horse-drawn watermelon carts and the old women who knew your mother, sprang up a clean, concrete Corbusian landscape amidst the on- and off-ramps of interstate highways. To forward-looking architects and planners, urban renewal made self-evident sense. Jumble would give way to order, decaying houses and ramshackle shops to hygienic high-rises, chaos to rationality, an all-black neighborhood to a deliberately integrated one. The universal demand for conscious control or direction of social process is one of the most characteristic features of our generation, the great free market economist Frederick Hayek wrote in an essay published in 1959. That anything is not consciously directed as a whole is regarded as itself a blemish, a proof of its irrationality and of the need to completely replace it by deliberately designed mechanism. It was against the background of the previous generation's faith in central planning and control that the 1970s rebellion against rationality had to be understood. Consciously created order looked beautiful in the plans and blueprints. In life, it was brutal, alienating, and inhuman. The anti-rationalists saw Southwest Washington's everywhere in psychiatry and nuclear power plants, table manners. They wanted to do to every one of those Southwest Washingtons exactly what was done in August 1973 to another huge urban renewal project, the 33 high-rise towers of St. Louis Pruitt-Ego Project. Blow them up. The 1970s were the decade in which Americans turned against modernist architecture. Young architects bewildered their Bauhaus elders by delighting in Robert Venturi's Learning from Las Vegas, which praised the gaudy horrors of the seedy old Las Vegas Strip. The supremely sensitive culture weather vane, the architect Philip Johnson scandalized his old colleagues by sticking a Chippendale broken pediment atop his 1984 Madison Avenue AT&T Tower, now the Sony building, and maybe even worse, facing the building in stone. Victorian art and architecture returned to fashion. In the 1960s, a careful young man could collect Tissot drawings on a foreign service salary. After 1975, it was a taste only an Andrew Lloyd Webber could afford to indulge. Old House Journal, the Bible of Historic Home Restoration, began publishing in 1973. Americans turned against overweening architects at exactly the same moment as they were rejecting cocksure schemes of economic control, overbearing doctors, austere apostles of high culture, strict enforcers of good order and good deportment of every kind. It was a revolution not so much against institutions as against the cool, methodical habits of mind underlying those institutions. to tear down a factory or revolt against a government or to avoid repair of a motorcycle because it is a system is to attack effects rather than causes. Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance proclaimed. And as long as the attack is upon effects only, no change is possible. The true system, the real system, is our present construction of systematic thought itself, and if a factory is torn down, but the rationality which produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a systemic government, but the systemic patterns of thought that produced that government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves in the succeeding government. Alas, like all revolutions, this one attacked what was good in the old regime of rational thought just as fiercely as it attacked the bad. Ideals of serious scholarship just as much as the excesses of Bauhaus architecture, orthodox religious faith as much as the planned economy, modern physics as much as Freudian psychiatry. All too many Americans had felt like cogs in the wheel. Resentment against the crimping and cramping of the individual personality inspired not only the Free Left or the New Left, not only the Berkeley Free Speech Movement and the Students for a Democratic Society, but also the 1964 Barry Goldwater campaign. Each member of the species is a unique creature. The conscience of the conservative is pricked by anyone who would debase the dignity of the individual human being. Dictators who rule by terror equally with those gentler collectivists who ask our permission to play God with the human race. Those were the days in which Americans still carried draft cards, still were expected to show up at the Department of Motor Vehicles once a year and line up all afternoon to exchange old license plates for new. Queues and licenses. That was just the way things worked. But a challenge had been hurled. Why must things work that way? Why must I accept them? The intense questioning of those days has lost its focus and intensity, but it has not ceased to prick. Like a drop of ink in a bucket of water, the questions have blurred, lost their shape, become indistinct, and finally vanished. But in vanishing, they have tinctured the whole bucket. And that was the chapter, let's see, what was the name of this thing again? It was Beyond Reason. Beyond Reason. And that was from the book, How We Got Here in the 70s, the decade that, for better or worse, brought you modern life. Thank you. And this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, reminding you to be patient, be smart, be beautiful, and to remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.